So my name is Peter Reynolds.
Peter Reynolds is on a mission.
Who loves books. And will keep reading and never stop. Raise both hands and wiggle your fingers.
Not just to encourage reading, which would make sense since he's written and illustrated more than 50 titles, including the very popular book, The Dot.
So this is the book you may know.
Instead, Reynolds wants to inspire kids and even adults to be their greatest selves.
Our wish for people is to have them discover what their life's work is, what their passion is, their life's passion. And it may not necessarily be their job. It could be their passion that just kind of keeps them recharged.
After all, he's seen what happens when the door closes on self-discoveries. For example, a girl in one of his art workshops who stopped believing in herself.
I'm like, I've got to save not only this little girl, but I imagine that there were probably many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of boys, girls, grown-ups who probably feel that they can't.
His books, including his latest title, Say Something, teach quite the opposite.
If you want to show the world who you are, say something with style. Ta-da!
Reynolds shares his inspiration for these strong, diverse, relatable characters.
And then I look at my drawing and I'm like, wow, this character looks a lot like this little girl.
As well as the people who encouraged his creativity.
She was this gentle rebel growing up. She would never take no as an answer. There was always a way around whatever obstacle.
Plus, how growing up as a twin definitely had its advantages.
Because I would be drawing away and, Paul would see me in flow and he would say, you stay there, I'll do your chores. And I would hear him. I was quite happy to let him go off. But yeah, he did my chores for me.
That's next in this conversation with children's book author and illustrator Peter Reynolds. Presented by St. Louis County Library and HEC Media.
Peter Reynolds, thank you so much for joining us.
I am so happy to be here.
Well, we decided to have this interview. We're at the Webster University's art department. And
I love it. What a great place for me. I feel very much at home.
Well, that's
here.
what we were thinking.
And I see all sorts of splashes of paint on everything, and that's sort of one of I try to encourage people to just splash bravely, and not worry, just let it flow.
Well, we thought you'd be comfortable here, but then I saw on your website that you pretty much do art anywhere. On the floor of your barn, did I
Yes. Well, I like lying down when I'm drawing.
Really?
So, yeah. My parents bought me a proper drafting table, with a ruler and the lamp and a chair. And I stored clothing on that. That was sort of the clothes horse. And I stayed on the floor drawing. I don't know, it's just sort of comfortable.
You like to be...
Yeah, I don't know. I think just find, find the place that makes you feel comfortable and also just be comfortable, when you're drawing. You don't have to be sitting at a desk.
I was reading that with your art, with your watercolors, it's not just water that you use, right?
I use anything, any liquid. Yeah, I use tea. I've also used the dew from grass if I need to. I've used wine, soda, really anything, milk.
Just to see what kind of different. You're a curious person.
I'm a curious person, and it's also just out of necessity. Sometimes you don't have running water, and you just look for something. And that's the same way, you don't need proper art supplies, right? You can use paper bags, you can use envelopes, you can use, the paper tablecloths, really anything you can, make a mark on.
So just think outside that box.
Right, yeah.
Well, I have to wonder what your secret is, because in researching you and all your projects for this interview today, holy cow. We're talking, so you've illustrated and written how many books?
Gosh.
A lot.
Yeah. Probably north of 50. Yeah.
And then you've illustrated for people like Judy Blume.
Right. Judy Blume. I work with Megan McDonald on the Judy Moody series, Susan Verde on the I Am series, I Am Yoga, I Am Peace, I Am Human. Just finishing up I Am Love right now in my studio. And I also collaborate with my twin brother, Paul.
And then there's Fablevision.
There's Fablevision, then there's Fablevision Learning. So Fablevision, we create media to help the good people on the planet, like Jim Henson Productions, Smithsonian, anyone that's trying to educate and enlighten people. We help them scale out their message using storytelling and media and technology.
Animations, things like that.
Yes, we do animated films, we do interactive applications, but then we have a spin-off, Fable Vision Learning. So we are creating tools for classrooms or wherever people learn, right? I'm very generous about what a classroom is. It could be the backyard, it could be your attic. So we create applications so that kids can become engineers and animators. We have a new program just coming out called Get Published. I'm online and I will coach kids and grown-up kids too through the publishing process. And I really emphasize for kids that, when you get published, you really have to kind of polish it up, right? Because you could draw, I'm all about, you just sketch it quickly, get it down, but there does come a time when you want to share it with the world that you should probably, polish it up and make sure, is it spelled correctly? Does it make sense? Is there another way? Should I add more color or less color? Is it too complicated? And then get it ready for prime time. And then when you're ready, then you say go. So in Get Published, the teacher actually becomes the editor-in-chief. And just the way that I can't just send my books off to the printer, I have my editors in between me, right? They're the firewall to say, okay, let's make sure it's, ready for the sharing with the world.
Well, you have kind of the evolution of book covers and things on your website. It's really interesting to see how things kind of change through that process.
Right. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
It's really interesting.
It never is the same as the original sketch.
Right.
Although sometimes I will go back to the original little, the little napkin doodle, and I'll say, wow, I was able to tell that story, visually with very few lines, and I redraw the final one trying to use as few lines as I did in the original. So like in the book, The Dot, all of those original drawings were on 3x5 note cards that I got from the pharmacy. I got a little stack, and as I make little films in my head. That's how I make my stories. So I make a film in my head, and I cast the film, and I let it roll, and then I basically visually note take. I take these 3x5 note cards and I just do a quick little illustration of what's in my head. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, I lay them all out. Yeah. And then I put captions under each one.
So it's visually first.
Visual first, right.
Then the story.
Right, yeah.
Interesting.
So the words come after, and I really only try to add as many words as I need that will kind of carry the story along.
As a parent, we appreciate that.
Well, right. I'm there. I have 2 children, and my daughter Sarah, she's 32 now, but when she was 4, 5, 6, she wanted to be read to, and she'd pull off these big.
Been there. Yes.
Yeah, right. Picture books with like so many words, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh,
it's gonna be an hour before you go to bed.
It's like, could we just get to the point? So I would actually edit on the fly. And so I would see this big thing of text, and I would see the picture, and I'm like, okay, well, the weasel jumped into the boat and sailed down the river. Next page. And then I realized that Sarah, at one point, we had sort of run out of books, and I said, can I tell you a story? And she said, yes. And her eyes lit up. And I realized it wasn't necessarily she wanted a book, she wanted a story. And of course, the other thing she wanted was time with me, right. Which of course, that's the best thing in the world, right? Is time with each other. And that's one of my missions, is to try to get people to put their cell phones down and their screens down and hang out and enjoy some of the lost arts, right? The lost arts are like dinner table conversation. Even making a dinner is becoming a lost art, right? Everyone's going through the drive-through, or they've got a microwave.
So
dish.
Rushed.
No, make the food, make the bread.
Let's talk more about your twin brother, like your forever collaborator. Because
yes.
I was reading, I think it was on your website, that is it true that when you were younger, if you were really into something creative, he would do chores for you?
He would, I have to say.
Now that's amazing.
I'm eternally grateful to Paul, because I would be drawing away, and Paul would see me in flow, and he would say, you stay there, because our parents would have this, we had a cowbell, ding, 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 and it meant come and help prepare the meal, and set the table, but Paul didn't want me to kind of break my creative stride, and he would say, you stay there, I'll do your chores. And I would hear him. I was quite happy to let him go off. But yeah, he did my chores for me.
So was there a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours sort of situation here? Or?
No, it was, I don't know, it just, I hope I did something nice for
I'm
Paul.
sure you did. I mean,
Yeah.
you guys have and obviously you are very good friends. I mean, you still work together.
Right. So we worked together, and I think for a long time we had this, we kind of believed this paradigm of Pete dreams and Paul does, right? Dream and do. So you dream it up and I'll make it happen. And then as it turned out, when we really looked at it, I'm also good at making things happen. And Paul is also a good dreamer. And Paul's also incredibly artistic and a great writer. And he's also a great teacher. He teaches at Boston College on top of everything else. So about maybe 8 years ago, I said to Paul, I'm like, Paul, enough with this cheering me on. I have to cheer you on because you're an amazing writer and teacher. Like, you've got lots of stories in you. So get writing. So he wrote a book called Going Places, and then also a series of books called The Steam-Powered Adventures of Sydney and Simon, fraternal twin mice who love science, technology, engineering, and math. They both happen to be artists. So not only do they express what they know or their questions and discoveries through art and music, but they use their creative, artistic mind to solve problems. And that actually is, for us, it's even more interesting, right? That there's creative people are cool with it being messy, right? And so does, and the best scientists are also, they're like cool with it being messy. They want mistakes to happen because they just want to see reactions, say, wow, that didn't work, but it did this.
Right.
Duly noted. I'm going to use that at some point. In the same way, if you mix your colors in a strange way, or that you can draw upon that later on. So
let's talk about Going Places a little bit, because that was a collaboration with you guys.
Yeah.
And in that book in particular, it's dedicated to your 10th grade teacher, right?
Dan LeClair, yes.
Yes. So tell me, and he inspired both of you, it sounds like.
Yeah, we were lucky. There was this sort of band of cool teachers, right? And we hung out with this band of cool teachers. And one of the teachers was Dan LeClair, and he was so in love with his subject. He taught art and architecture. That was one of his courses. He would get so animated, and we loved it because he would go off on these great tangents describing, his trips to Greece. And but the thing that we learned from him was passion, for a subject. But he told both Paul and I he told everybody in class. He said, I dare you to have an original idea.
Which makes a lot of sense in Going Places.
Right?
That book.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
And he said, many of you will never have an original idea. And that was like, I think he was just getting us going.
Right.
But both Paul and I had that reaction, like, that, of course we're going to. And then it's like, well, what is an original idea? Which is kind of a profound question because, there's this layering through history. This had to happen for this to happen. You have to know this to. But occasionally there are people who they do put it all together in a brand new way, which is what Going Places is all about. The kids in the class, everybody gets the same kit. It says Going Places on the box. It actually never says go-kart, but all the kids, the instructions are for a go-kart, but it doesn't say that you're required to make a go-kart. Yeah. And Maya, the girl, you see her drawing pictures of birds, and what she's doing is she's actually interested in the concept of going places, of transportation, of getting from here to there, and noticing that, hey, birds do it in a different way. And she kind of takes a whack at creating something out of all these parts that would allow her to fly. Yeah. And she has this wild flapping thing. And then Raphael, the neighbor, he's sort of, dazzled by her wild invention. Yeah. But he's also very practical. So he's like, that's kind of cool. What if we work together? Which, of course, the instructions also didn't say you could not work together.
Right.
And we were just thinking, we have our mother to thank for that. She's she was this gentle rebel growing up.
Really?
Yeah. She would never take no as an answer. There was always a way around whatever obstacle.
I like her.
Right. She's amazing. And she would say, we'd say, oh, it's past the deadline. We can't apply to go on, the field trip to blow. And then she's ridiculous. She's British. And she's like, ridiculous. I'm going to march down there. I'm going to tell them. And then when we were younger, she would advocate for us. And we would see her sort of march in and, tell them, how it was going to be. And then later on, I think we learned how to do that for ourselves and advocate for ourselves. And also realize like, hey, there are suggestions in life, right? And rules are suggestions. And you can monitor and modify as you go along, right? Yeah. So.
You mentioned Maya and Raphael in Going Places.
Going Places, yeah.
I'm really curious. I know you said you start out with these sketches and that's kind of, you see it in your head. But the characters, the names, the evolution of them, they're diverse. I love your characters. Where do those come from?
I mean, really, from the we're a journey family ourselves. So my dad was born in Argentina. My mother was born in England and London. Grandfather was born in New Zealand. Grandmother Scotland.
Oh, wow.
I was born in Canada. So was Paul. And our little sister was born in the United States. So we were kind of a roving family anyway. And growing up, we had our Argentine cousins coming and relatives and lots of, British flag flying instead of the American flag outside. It was slightly eccentric. But I think understanding that the world is a big place and that story is a way to have a conversation with the entire planet, right? Because in the end, we're all not that different. Whether you're in Korea or you're in Belgium or Peru or in Boston, we love our families. We want to take care of our kids, and we want to share a good meal. And story is the thing that glues us all together. So universal storytelling is what we're interested in, and of course, I wanted to make sure that the characters were diverse. And my book, The Dot, features a little girl named Vashti.
Right, and that name, where is that?
I actually met a little girl. She came into the coffee shop. I was working on the book, The Dot. I didn't have the name for the character. She came up to me. She was selling flowers as a fundraiser for her school. And so I bought the flower, and then she was still standing there, and I look up, she's still standing there. And then I look at my drawing, and I'm like, wow, this character looks a lot like this little girl. And she had this mopper brown hair and big brown eyes. And then I realized that she wanted the drawing. So I said, she said, oh, who's the drawing for? I said, it's for you.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I said, how do you spell your name? And she spelled her name. And I said, Vashti? She said, Vashti. I said, that's like a really cool name. And I said, I'm actually looking for a name for the character in my book. Can I use your name? And she said, really? So I said, well, I can't promise, but
right.
But I tried it out. Vashti sat glued to her chair. Her paper was empty. I'm like, that's perfect. And so somewhere out in the world, I never saw her again.
I was wondering if she knows.
She's somewhere out there. So
there can't be that
was
many.
17 years ago. So I'm going to guess she was about 7 or 8 at the time. So
don't you
if anybody
wonder?
knows of Vashti, or in their mid to late 20s. The book is about being, an artist, and of course, artists are original, right? We're inventing and splashing and creating, and so I wanted to make sure the character had an original name. So I don't know too many Vashtis, although there are Vashtis around the world now reaching out to me saying, "Oh, thank you for writing a book with my name in it."
Well, and speaking of teachers, that book is dedicated to a teacher who kind of changed things around for you in 7th grade?
7th grade, yeah. 7th grade math class.
In math class,
in
right.
In math class. I was an incessant doodler through school, and I drew on everything, and I drew all the time. So not all teachers appreciated that, and so they would say, you can do that on your own time.
Pay attention.
Pay attention, eyes up front. Mr. Matson was the first teacher who said, he said, I want to talk to you after class. And he said, I notice that you love to draw, and you have this imagination. He said, how would you like to look through the math textbook, find a concept that you could teach to another student using your art and your storytelling? And so I went home and I created a comic book to teach math, brought it in, and he had the an inspiration to not stop there, because he's like, do you know what this is? And I'm like, it's a comic book. He said, it's a comic book. It's also called a storyboard. It's what a filmmaker uses to plan out a film. How would you like to make an animated film?
What a cool teacher.
Right? And he could have said, well, good luck.
Yeah, have fun with that. Yeah.
But he went to
I've got too many things to do, right?
He went to the high school and found a teacher, Jim Morrow, who taught media at the high school. And he was an animator himself, and a cartoonist, and a writer, a game board designer, just an incredibly creative guy. He came down to junior high, helped us make this animated film. So age 12, I made my very first animated film to teach. Well, that's what I do today with Paul.
That's Fablevision,
right? Fablevision. So we have 30 writers, artists, animators, programmers, all using story to teach. And now, of course, we have technology.
Let's talk a little bit about Say Something, the book that just is coming out.
Yeah.
So for that book, I know there's been this huge movement with the dot. There's a dot day. And then with the word collector, there's a movement with it as well.
Right, yeah.
Hugely successful with both of those.
Yeah.
Are you hoping to have some kind of a movement with Say Something? And what would it be, I guess?
Well, I think it's connected. I mean, they're all connected. In a way, all of my books are, and I just noticed this recently, that they're like little puzzle pieces that are snapping together. I didn't realize what I was doing, but then I realized like all these little pieces are pieces of this puzzle. The word collector, I wanted to share the joy of collecting words, because again, in school, sometimes we kind of strip out the joy, and it's like, it's vocabulary acquisition, and the goal is to have a word, and then they give you the definition, and then you kind of spit it back. Right. But words are so much cooler than that, right? You can really do it, again, deep dive into words. So I created this character, Jerome, who loves words, and he loves to collect words. And at the end of the story, he shares his collection of words with the other kids. And where that leaves off, the Say Something picks up. And so once you've got your words, awesome that you have all these words. But what are you going to do with them? And the world right now needs all voices. And we need to give voice and encouragement to everybody, whether you're young or old, that your voice matters. And however it manifests itself, right? Voice can certainly be with words. You could get up on stage, you could have a microphone, but you can also use your art, your music, and also just your presence, just showing up and saying, this is important to me. So that's the hope for this book. And already I've gotten some pretty amazing reactions. And again, creative teachers know exactly what to do. I don't have to say anything. They just open it up, they read it, and they're like, okay, I know what I'm doing. And of course, the hope is that kids are going to, dip their toe into that water and say, yeah, what do I believe in? How can I make the world a better place? What does the world need less of, and what does it need more of? Those are the two questions I always ask. In fact, it's inspiration for my storytelling. What do we need less of, and what do we need more of, right? So we need less hate, and we need more love.
We've talked about the success of those books and how, these movements have happened around them. But when you started, it wasn't that easy. Like, it wasn't like you're like, here's my book, and it became hugely successful, right? Because
absolutely not. Right.
The first book you self-published, right?
Self-published.
Northstar.
Yep, the Northstar. And I just knew in my heart that it was a story that needed to be told. And it's about a little boy who gets lost in a swamp, and he really tried to follow this path that was set out for him, but it got confusing, and he just ended up in not a very happy place.
Right.
And he was trying to figure out where am I going? And eventually he discovers that he had this map this entire time, but he was so busy with all these signs around him in the swamp that he didn't notice it was the star map, the stars above him. And of course, one of the stars is brighter than the other. And he uses that star map to guide himself out of this swamp. And at the end of the book, it says, it's just the beginning of this journey, right? But it's his journey, his own wonderful journey. And what that was a metaphor to say, there are a lot of kids who get dragged through school. They end up in the swamp. And it may not necessarily be school that's the swamp. It can also be emotional swamp. There's a lot of things going on in kids' lives at home, on the playground. and they just feel lost and they don't know which direction to go. And I wanted to give them some hope to say, do you know what? When you were born with your own personal constellation. And when you get busy and when you're not mindful of this map, you do get lost, but you actually have some clues. In fact, every kid is giving us clues. In fact, we all give each other clues. Sometimes we don't see them, but when you see those little clues, that's like a little star that's emerging in your constellation. So you might be good at art, and you might love animals, right? And you might you dream about being a teacher. It's like, okay, well, how do you connect those, right? If you imagine that as a constellation, you could connect and say, wow, you could teach kids writing with fables, right? Because fables have animals in them. So that's connecting all three of those stars together. So I get kids and grown-ups to make their star maps.
Oh, interesting.
And it's their own personal, completely randomly, beautifully whimsical map to help them guide them into their future. Mm-hmm. So we know a lot more than we think we know, right? And so that was the goal of the Northstar. So I knew I had to write that book and I had to share it. So I decided to self-publish. I self-published back in '97, and through Fablevision, and we sold thousands of copies. And then we had an entrepreneur who loved it. He flew from Texas and said, "This is what I keep trying to tell people. I'll buy 5,000 copies and just hand them out on the streets of Boston to people who need them," which gave us enough money to do another reprint.
Oh
and then eventually we said, wait a sec, we're becoming a publishing company. We found Kennewick Press in Cambridge. Well, they found me. They said, we love your stuff. We love your sensibilities. They ended up publishing the Northstar. So the one you find on the shelf is the second edition. Through that connection, they said, oh, we have this book series that just came across our desk called Judy Moody, if you'd like to illustrate. So I ended up illustrating the Judy Moody series.
How it happened.
And then eventually Kennewick said, oh, do you have anything else in your little shoebox of ideas? And I immediately said, absolutely. Like with the Northstar, I saw a lot of kids struggling in school, and I thought, oh man, I wish we were enlightened enough to see the gifts that these kids have. In the same way, the dot, I saw a little girl she was in a workshop I was doing, and she was absolutely panicked to show me her artwork. And she was in first grade. And she wouldn't let me see her artwork. And she just quietly, she turned her head and she said, I just can't draw. And I thought, what? She's in first grade. Where did she learn? And then then I suddenly realized, like, wow, wait a sec. She learned that from probably clumsy adults. Because adults will often say, oh, I can't draw with a straight line with a ruler. I can't draw my way out of a paper bag. It's like, and I think, well, kids are pretty smart. They hear that and they're like, well, my art looks, frankly, her stick figure looks better than what I'm doing right now. But she says, that's terrible, so I guess I'm terrible. So I'm like, I've got to save not only this little girl, but I imagine that there were probably many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of boys, girls, grown-ups who probably feel that they can't. And I maybe it goes back to my mother, saying, we're going to find a way. And I wanted to find a way to get kids past that rock, So I had 3 stories: The Dot, Ish, and Sky Color. And that's my Creatrilogy series. And that is my invitation for people to be more brave, to develop their own voice, and then also never stop learning. There's always going to be, you're never going to be an expert, right? You're always on your way to being an expert. And just keep pushing, keep thinking more deeply. The world needs your voice. Mine? Yes, yours. Go ahead. It doesn't need to be perfect, as long as it's from your heart. You don't have to be loud. Powerful words can be a whisper. You can say something in so many ways, with words, with action, with creativity.